Hi, this is Norman Long, and this demonstration was featured partly in an Artist and Illustrators magazine article published July 2021, and it's this painting Winter Concourse that's under discussion. So it was started actually with purely abstract drawing, so just automatic drawing, which was developed then in tonal values, just darkening some of the shapes until this stage, and then some figures were dropped in. So this is just a 10 by 12 monochrome study, which was then over an old painting then was developed. So parts of the old painting are left to show through, and this colour version was painted on top. Later in the process, I actually dropped in the photographs, the original photographs of the people, which were taken from looking down on the Concourse at Euston Station. So just random people. And on Photoshop, I dropped them into a photograph of the painting in progress. This was done a little bit later in the progress, but you can see the reference photos that I used. I actually did two versions of Winter Concourse, basically because I got stuck on one of them and moved on to the other one. So this is the first stage of the first version, which then was reworked into this, so significantly reworked. You can see in the bottom right that the original signature remains, and are masked out using masking tape, some of the original painting, just so that I didn't completely obliterate everything of it, but it's become much more highly developed. And then this is the second version in its first stage. They were exhibited as this first stage, and then it's been significantly reworked, particularly in the bottom half, to this stage. And this is the stage we pick it up at in these little videos. So mainly it's this bottom figure that's been added to change that space significantly. I tend to attack paintings without too much forethought, but in this instance, when working on a slightly larger painting, every change takes time, so it's good to give it a bit of planning ahead. So one of the simplest ways to do that is to take a photograph of the painting as it is and to just adjust it, either in Photoshop or just on your phone. So here I've taken a black and white photograph of the painting in progress, and just adjusted it on my phone with a simple finger adjustments, different greys, so you can see that the changes that I'm sort of envisaging in the composition. And having done that, I then redraw. In this instance, I use pastel, just so that I'm not sloshing about in wet paint, so that I'm being quite decisive about putting the paint in the right place, and hopefully being able to preserve some of the colours and textures that are already in the underpainting. When you look at Degas paintings, his redrawing starts with a thin black line, and it really helps him to be decisive about the reworkings. So, having put it aside for a while, not looked at it, I found this area here to be the quietest area of the picture, and therefore my eye was continually drawn to it. And so I might break it up a little bit more, just so that your eye doesn't settle there too much. It's not the kind of painting with a specific focal point. It's the kind of painting that your eye kind of jumps around and doesn't really settle and discovers things in. But before I get too far, I've just started to scrape this down a bit, because the texture in these areas is the heaviest in the painting. I'll try and show you that. So here's a bit of heavier texture, and then in other areas it gets thinner, and then down here in these very light areas was very heavy. It is very heavy, and so I'm just scraping that down a bit so that hopefully it'll fit in with the whole scheme of things. So it's a little bit noisy. This is on board, oil on board, so that means it can give it a good bit of grief. You know, puncture the canvas. I find that when you're trying to re-access a painting, so get in touch with it again, one of the things I do is just rub my hands over the surface. This has pastel outlines on it, so that's not a good idea in this instance. But often I'll do that. I'll just get really close to it and, you know, just get in touch with the surface again. It's a strange thing, just to sort of reconnect. So, amongst all the other formal aspects of painting, texture or surface quality is one of those elements, one of the formal elements they call it. I hate those technical terms, but that's what it is, one of the formal elements. So just as we want to balance the colours and the shapes and the lines, we also want to balance the textures. So that's what I'm doing here, is hopefully balancing them out a bit more. And leaving a painting aside for a while is a good thing in my view, because when I see it now, this picture, I've forgotten what I worked on last, and I've forgotten how many days I spent on it and how I struggled with it. It all settles into one image, and I'm not precious about it. I know I spent ages on this head trying to get it. And the day after I'd spent, you know, a whole day on that head area, the day after to go in and do that I wouldn't have been able to do it. I would have been frightened of losing all that work. But now I don't care about it now. You know, I care about the whole painting. Maybe it's like I don't know, like the dating game. If you care too much about painting, you make yourself very vulnerable, which is alright. You could do that. It's good to not care too much about it. I'm feeling like I'm getting into the surface now, you know. I've gone over most of the canvas, and but I'll just spend a few more minutes doing that, and then I'll think about whether I want to oil it out or not. Probably not, because it's got pastel outlines, so I probably won't oil out in this instance, because I lose those outlines. And then I need to look at it from a distance and reassess what I'm going to do. So I might do some glazing on this area to break it up a little bit. So for glazing, I've got my medium, which is basically, well, it is not just basically, it is just white spirit and linseed oil. That's all it is. So I'll grab a few soft brushes. They don't really need to be soft brushes, but for glazing I might use soft brushes. Synthetic. Pathetic synthetic. I'll need some socks, some old socks or other articles of cotton clothing. I haven't got a transparent yellow on here, so that's a transparent yellow. That's actually a Winsor Newton colour. That's the name on the tube. Indian yellow would be another good alternative. So I've drawn some pastel lines across to break this up, but there is a grid pattern. I don't know, we're just gonna monkey around with it a bit. Having applied these glazes in distinct patches of colour, if I was to just get a rag and rub it across them, then they'd all smudge into each other. So I'm going to use a little bit of tonking, just pressing paper onto the surface and taking it off before I start rubbing with a rag. Through this process of glazing and also scumbling, we arrive at this surface here. So towards the top of the image, it's more scumbling, dragging dry paint across the surface, letting some of the underlayer show through. And towards the bottom here, it's more glazing, so thin layers of transparent paint, which let some of the underlayers show through. Now we're going to move on to some of the more direct painting procedures, which is simply mixing a colour and putting it on. This section of the girl's head was a part of the picture I had to repaint numerous times. Not so much for the likeness, but for the struggle of making it fit into the picture, not be the most obvious thing to look at. It's very easy to make the human face the first thing that you would look at in a painting, so I'm really trying to hide it within the painting. This is the stage we pick it up at. As you can see, it's been reworked at least once. I don't expect to get the painting of the head, the face correct first time. I think that's too much pressure. Often it takes me, particularly with a commission where you've got to get it looking like somebody in particular, then 5 or 6 goes at a head is par for the course for me. So after this little video reworking the head, it's certainly not the last time I painted on it, because it's got to fit in with the rest of the painting as well. So it's a sort of tricky balance. I've oiled it out, so just with a mixture of linseed oil, white spirit and water, shaken together in a bottle. Just poured some in a tub and brushed it over the surface, and then wiped it off, just to bring back, because it's quite dark paint, it can sink in colour. Actually, it wasn't as sunk as I thought it might be. It's just that they're dark colours and they can sink a little bit. So it restores the oil content in the surface and makes it glossy, so that any new paint I'm putting on is glossy against glossy. So there's a bit of a conversion going on here from the image to the painting. Within the context of this painting, I don't want the head to take too much attention, so all the tonal values are squashed together. So the darks aren't as dark as in the picture, and the lights aren't as light as in the picture, obviously. But it's relying upon changes in colour to articulate the form. That's where we're at, but I don't like it too much, so it's got to be reworked. So I might start with a little bit of redrawing of some shapes. So I'm using a rigger brush, which is a very long-haired brush for outlining, for drawing shapes. So these two curves, which are an invented bubble hat, and you can tell it's invented because the shapes are dead boring. So I'm just trying to make it a little bit more interesting as a shape. You can mix a colour and you can think it's the right colour on the palette, but when you put it right next to the picture, it tells you how far away you are before you even put it on. So each time I'm mixing a colour, I pick up a new brush at this stage, so that I've got the colour on the brush for later. So the extent of my measuring goes to lining things up. Here I'm lining up the top of the ear with the eye, make sure they're roughly level, and then simple big measurements, comparing the height of the face to the distance from the tip of the nose to the ear. And what I find is that because I've invented the bubble hat, I need to restate the exact position of the hairline in order to measure from it. So no complicated systems of measurement, just simple comparisons. And finally, just a little clip of some direct painting, redesigning some of the shapes in the background to fit in with the shapes in the figures and the bags, echoing stripes and things like that. This is the stage the painting's at the moment. It may be exhibited like this, or it may, if it hangs around in my studio long enough, it might get reworked again. That's just the way it goes.